Chapter 12 of Mounted Police Life in Canada. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Mounted Police Life in Canada by Captain Burton Dean. Chapter 12. The Passing of the Calgary Barracks, 1914. It was in 1907, the year after I took up my abode in my new house at Calgary, that the agitation began which eventually resulted in the site of the Calgary Barracks being handed over to the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway Company. In the course of that summer a man whom I knew very well dropped into my office and said he was the agent of a syndicate which had placed considerable sums at his disposal for the purchase of the property in the immediate vicinity of the barracks. He interviewed the divisional tailor and offered him $15,000 spot cash for a house and 25-foot lot which he owned near the barracks. The tailor, being a man of singular domesticity, said that he must consult his wife, and did so at the noonday recess. On receipt of his conjugal instructions, however, he found the aforesaid agent was no longer looking for him. When he discovered the agent and said that he was willing to sell, the agent replied, "Oh, my dear fellow, that money has been invested elsewhere. You did not accept my offer. My people would not wait, and I bought another property. The money is now all gone, so that you see you are out of luck." The syndicate that I have mentioned was composed of Liberal politicians, possessed of the inside information as to the tentative negotiations that had begun, who were interested in exploiting the public domain to their own advantage. A year or so later I was instructed to have the barracks painted, and a contract of about $700 was let for that purpose. Before the work had commenced I met a prominent lawyer, one of the inner circle, in the barrack grounds one day, who said, "Captain Dean, within 3 months you will see the Grand Trunk Pacific men in possession of these grounds, removing the buildings and levelling the site, preparatory to constructing a big Union Station here." The Union Station was intended to accommodate the Canadian Northern and Grand Trunk Pacific Railways, both of which desired a foothold in Calgary in opposition to the Canadian Pacific. I said to my friend, "Do you know that we have just let a contract to paint all these buildings here?" "Waste of money," he somewhat angrily replied, and I retorted, "That may be so, but the indications are that your dream is not going to be immediately realised." Year after year rolled on, and there were no results in sight. The Grand Trunk Pacific may be said to have been Sir Wilfrid Laurier's foundling. His desire was to go down to history as the promoter of a transcontinental line which should worthily compete with the Canadian Pacific, and the railway authorities thought that they could acquire a parcel of something over 35 acres from the Dominion Government for a song. But they reckoned without their host, for Sir Wilfrid had no idea of throwing away an important asset like that for nothing, and he stipulated that the price should be $1,000,000. That was a hopeless proposition to the G.T.P., as they were called, but there are more ways of killing a cat than by choking it with cream. When Mr. (now Sir Robert) Borden, then in opposition, toured the country prior to the general election of 1911, and held a very large meeting at the Calgary Rink, the then member for Calgary cast reflections at the Dominion Government for "holding up" the Grand Trunk for $1,000,000 in the case of a property worth, say, $150,000. Although we were both ardent Conservatives, my wife and I were so disgusted at this statement that we abandoned our seats on the platform and went home. This statement, which was uncontradicted, lighted a fresh spark of hope in the hearts of the before mentioned Liberal syndicate. "My God," said they, "we may come through it after all." And the irony of it was that the chance came to them through their political opponents, who were bound to be again in the government, whether it was right or wrong. Eventually a committee of Calgary men was deputed to look over the site and form an estimate of its value. The only map apparently extant used to hang in my office, and the Comptroller, R.N.W.M.P., in an early stage of the conference, asked permission to carry it off to Ottawa, as he had none. My recollection is that the map showed the site to consist of 37 acres and a fraction. Be that as it may, it came to be spoken of as embracing about 35 acres. The committee of townsmen assumed the site to consist of 35 acres and calculated that each acre would cut up into 10 lots, making 35,000 lots of 25-foot width. These assessed at $1,000 a lot, with one dissentient member, a Mr. Diamond, a Calgary jeweller, who considered that the lots were worth $5,000 apiece. After the Borden government came into power, the assistant judge of the Exchequer Court was sent to make inquiries on the spot and to assess the value. He held an informal sort of inquiry, and eventually fixed upon $225,000 as the figure. It was essentially an inquiry designed to popularise the award with the party in power, but even then the amount was regarded at Ottawa as being inadequate, for it was raised by Mr. Borden to $250,000. Certain witnesses, most of them interested, tendered their evidence, but the judge failed to call the one disinterested witness, namely the city assessor, who could have told him that the 25-foot lots adjoining the barracks enclosure on its western side were valued, for city taxation purposes, at $20,000 each, and that those on the eastern boundary, across the Elbow River on the same avenue, were valued at $5,000 each. A mean estimate between the two would have been a businesslike proposition, and would have supported Sir Wilfrid Laurier's estimate, but that was the last thing that the party in power had in their minds. So it came about that the Grand Trunk Pacific, for the payment of $250,000, obtained a very desirable slice of the public domain, which was worth at least 4 times that sum. It was not until St. Valentine's Day that I received official notice that the barracks had to be vacated by April 1st following, which was a fair sample of maladministration on the part of the Dominion Government. Mr. Borden had had 2 years and a half wherein to consider whether or not, and at what price, he would sell the barracks site to the railway company, and, after all that, the departments concerned were allowed 6 weeks wherein to make arrangements which it was not possible to make in that time. That was where one of the pleasantries of opposing politics came in. It was the duty of the provincial government to make provision for the prisoners, and they had done nothing of this kind, so that, in effect, the Dominion Government's order to us to vacate the barracks by April 1st was an absurdity. Until provision had been made elsewhere for the prisoners, they were obliged to stay where they were, and so long as the prisoners had to be looked after, our men could not be moved, so that it was not until the last day of the month of April that we sent away to Macleod in a special train 40 male and 19 female prisoners, with 2 matrons and a suitable escort. I saw Mrs. Stuttaford then for the last time, as she was going to inaugurate the women's prison in Macleod. Quarters in the city had been provided for our men and horses, and we moved into them within a day or 2 after the departure of the prisoners. The once pretty site soon became unrecognisable. The shrubs and trees were removed, the buildings torn down, and the only house left intact was the one that I had vacated, and that was moved to the opposite end of the enclosure for occupation by the station agent. Personally, I had no particular regrets. My wife and I had agreed that we would leave Western Canada at the end of June, to seek out some little spot in England where the Maréchal Niel rose will grow out of doors. And to that end, early in the year 1914, I had bespoken our passages to Liverpool, to leave New York by a ship sailing on July 11th. We moved off the Grand Trunk property on April 1st, and settled in a house which I rented in West Calgary. There the best that I could do was to establish my patient in comfortable surroundings under canvas at the back of the house, with electric lights, bells, heat, and a fan, for the weather was so variable that the fan and hosepipe spray were required in the daytime to keep the tent cool, and at night the heater had to be turned on to keep it warm. Comfortably housed in a double-roofed tent, with 2 excellent nurses to wait upon her by day and by night, my dear wife spent her last days, and passed away peacefully and painlessly on the morning of July 22nd. I laid her to rest by the side of her old father in the Roman Catholic cemetery at Calgary, and had a suitable headstone erected, and then, having had only 2 months' leave in my 31 years of service, I applied for a 6 months' leave from the ensuing October 1st, to be retired on pension at the expiration thereof. My department was generous enough to assent to every request that I made, and Commissioner Perry was very considerate. He pressed me to consider myself quite free from office obligations during my stay in the West, and to devote my attention to regaining my own health and strength. I took him largely at his word, and on the night of September 30 I bade farewell to Calgary, the associations of which, despite the sympathy of kind friends, had become unendurable. CHAPTER 13.